You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
Do you need a car? Been shopping only to be turned down because of bad credit, low credit, no credit, bankruptcy, or divorce? Guess what? Today's your lucky day, because now you can buy a car, truck, or SUV, just about any vehicle. It's true. Bad credit doesn't matter. No credit doesn't matter. Bankruptcy or divorce, it just doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, your job is your ticket to your new vehicle. We're Auto Credit Express, and we've helped thousands of people just like you. Antonio H. told us, great company, got me connected, and the day I went in, I drove off in the car I wanted. 100% worth your time. Need a car? Get started now and drive off as early as today. Just text FINANCE, FINANCE, to 357-911 right now to get started. That's FINANCE, FINANCE, to 357-911. Auto financing the easy way. Text FINANCE to 357-911.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Everyone loves liberty. Our rights come from God, not the government. So why are you letting other people tell you what's best for your healthcare? Exercise your freedom with Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share is a community of people who voluntarily share one another's medical costs. Liberty Health Share is founded on the idea that most people truly want to help one another. Healthcare sharing allows members to do just that as a true community that supports one another in times of need. Liberty believes people should make decisions for themselves and their families. Members are able to take back the freedom to make their own decisions about their healthcare. Freedom from guilt or doubt about how your money is used. You have the freedom to direct your healthcare, not to be dictated to by bureaucrats. Stop letting others tell you what to do and join a community of like-minded people. Exercise your freedom. Join Liberty Health Share and take back the control of your healthcare while helping those around you. Call Liberty at 855-58-LIBERTY. Again, that's 855-58-LIBERTY for more information, or you can check them out at libertyhealthshare.org. Again, that's libertyhealthshare.org.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
At St. Jude, a family never sees a bill at all. It's like the world has been lifted off of your shoulders.
St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Finding cures. Saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
Yes, he did. Heavy brotherhood from sea to shining sea. You know, I wish I had somebody to help me say.
Good evening, everybody. This is Liz Neuerfeld, and I am joined again tonight by my partner, Bill O'Reilly, on a very special evening where we celebrate the life and contributions of a spectacular American human being and patriot, George Herbert Walker Bush, who everybody knows died on Friday night and is being honored and celebrated this week with his funeral coming up this Wednesday. So, Billy, good evening to you.
How are you, Liz? I'm actually sitting here looking at a picture of him, or then Vice President Bush in Air Force Two, with someone that I recognize in the photo, which looks to me like Liz Neuerfeld. You're pretty good. You're standing next to Lee Atwater. Exactly. It's a great shot. It's actually if anybody wants to follow Liz on Twitter, and I highly recommend it, it's at LizFeld1, and that photo is up now. I think somebody tweeted to it. If you want to take a look at Liz at age 11. How old were you in that shot, Liz? Like 23?
I should put this picture up maybe for a day or two. I was 20, very close, 26, exactly.
26, okay.
25, yeah. Just turned 26, yes. And that photo is on Air Force Two. We're actually on our way back from a campaign trip. We were out in Iowa, and the vice president was having a quick, impromptu presser with these fabulous reporters who I will identify in a minute. But he was talking about Iran-Contra because it had just
no kidding
spoken, yes. And it's hard to tell because from this photo, people are smiling, including me. So I'm not quite sure what we were laughing about.
He looks so relaxed, though, talking about Iran-Contra. That's impressive.
Yes. But, well, listen, he was, in addition to so many other things which we'll talk about him that made him special, he was remarkably transparent and accessible. And of course, at the time he was not president, and there is it sounds like a silly thing to say, but a massive difference between being the president and the vice president. But it was not at all unusual for him to hold these sessions with these reporters on trips. And we took many, many trips during those years. And he was very close to a lot of these reporters. And I never thought they were particularly kind to him, as you know, and you and I could talk about that too.
They never are.
They never are. But in this particular photo, there's Walter Robinson from the Boston Globe. These were all the White House correspondents for their respective papers. And Joel Brinkley from the New York Times.
So the giant names, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's Lee Atwater and Rich Bond, who was the head of the RNC at the time, or the deputy director of the RNC. And
is that Rich Bond behind you? I don't know if anyone's looking at the photo, but is that him behind you in the blue shirt?
No, that's Tom Collimore, who was the cabinet secretary cabinet secretary or domestic policy secretary for the vice president, and he went on to serve under Bush when he was president for a while. So Rich Bond and Lee Atwater were the political folks on the flight, and then Tom was there in his political capacity.
Yeah. It's funny, the thing that dates the photo the most is the tape recorders next to Vice President Bush, which are about the size of small novels. And the
velamin. Can you see closely on the table the velamin?
Oh, right. Oh, yes. There it is. There.
Isn't that funny? Oh, gosh. And look how young these reporters are.
Liz, how long did you work in the Reagan-Bush administration?
Well, I started when I was 23, I think. Maybe
wow. Yep.
24. And till I was 27. So almost 4 full years. Not, it's funny. I think now so many, my own kids are that age, and I think, who hired me? How did I get that job?
Right.
The truth is, you do need a balance between veterans and younger folks, because it does require a lot of energy, as you know, and just a sense of wonder. And gosh, it really, I look back now and I've thought so much about this over the last couple of days as I've reconnected with some old colleagues and friends about what an extraordinary privilege it was to do that. And what a blast, just a blast. Where were you during those years?
I was 17 in 84, or no, what was I? I was 21. I was 17 in 80, so I couldn't vote. So I was going into college, and then so the first real involvement I got in politics was 86, and then 88 I actually worked on as an unpaid, for unpaid, paper pusher in the press office in New York for the 88 Bush campaign, even though I was secretly a Kemp fan. But you were already in there, and I was aware, through my, my sister, your good dear friend Priscilla, of your involvement. I was just wowed that you were down there, because those were such heady times. What was it like? What was it like in the administration in general? I mean, it looks. That's you go back through history. That was one of the great administrations. And to me, it went on for 12 years.
Well, it was extraordinary. My first job there, working for David Stockman, was when he was the budget director, and of course I've said it so many times since then, you couldn't name any budget director after David Stockman. I mean, right? Was he as smart as he looked, as he sounded? Oh gosh, yes, and he was, and he was as crazy and committed, and he was very quiet to work for. First of all, it's funny, in those days you could smoke in the office, and he was a chain smoker. When I think about it, in a government building, no less, so he smoked a lot, he drank a ton of coffee, and he worked from 5:30 in the morning until 9 or 10 at night, every single night. Yeah. And he was shuttling back and forth to the West Wing. We were in the old executive office building, daily, and he had cabinet, it's funny, people probably don't know this, but historically the OMB director was not a cabinet level position, but he had so much power, and he was such a scary guy that he would summon cabinet secretaries to his office to talk about their budget requests, and they were terrified. I can remember Parker Heckler and Elizabeth Dole and these types coming and sitting, literally knees shaking, in the outer office, waiting to be escorted in to ask for $10 for whatever they were looking to do. Just the whole culture, though. But there was a tremendous amount of respect for Ronald Reagan and for Bush, and the energy there. I think particularly also coming off what had been a pretty tough decade, the 70s, both whether you were a Republican or a Democrat. So Reagan was sweeping in, and there was this elegance and Hollywood style marketing, Mike Deaver approach to everything, but then also some serious policy work going on. All the deregulation that went on at the time, obviously all the foreign policy stuff. So, when I started at OMB, it was a great opportunity to see across both the domestic and international landscape what was going on, because that every single thing touches the budget. And there were such different people, and they came from different cultures. Reagan and Bush. Was there a sense of that in the administration, or was it a single culture that came down? I mean, Bush came out of the patrician East and the kind of noblesse oblige. You're obligated to do good if you have privilege. Reagan was more the swashbuckling Westerner, more of a liberal. Well, I don't know. You can go back and forth on that one. But a different feel. Did it blend, or was it two different cultures within the White House? And I don't mean that as a criticism, just as a question. Funny as you say it. I mean, even thinking about now, if you're comparing it to Trump and Pence, you'd say the same thing. I would say, and obviously I was young, and we were just so isolated. Not isolated. We were so busy living in our own world, just getting through all the chaos and activity of our own daily responsibilities. But they were pretty distinct. And make no mistake about it, the president's operation is the president's operation. And at that point, when I was working for the vice president, he was starting to spend a lot of time traveling around the country campaigning. It was the midterm, 86, 87, campaigning for local and state, candidates, a lot of congressional folks. He would do anything. He would do school board elections to help people. But obviously this was gearing up for his own 88 campaign. So he was gathering all the chips. So we spent a lot of time on the road doing political stuff. Whereas the president's operation was running the country, and they were not going to be running for re-election. So that part was very different.
Right, which is fairly typical, I would guess. But what's it like? What were first of all, what's it like traveling around on Air Force Two? I got to ask, and you must have just been nonstop. And also, I'm looking at this picture, and you got seven men in one room, and Liz. It was a little bit of a different era than two, I imagine. But what was the travel like? I mean, that's a lot of hours, I would imagine, and intensity, like ton.
There's that poor Kathy, what's her face, from the Houston Chronicle is there. You can't see her; she's the back of her head. Was it intense? Yes, I will tell you, it was a pretty joyful environment. All the stuff you're hearing now about the devotion that the Secret Service and the White House staff had for Bush was playing out in every single day for real. I mean, there was he and Barbara Bush, but he in particular were gracious, they were warm. Everybody felt like you belonged. I raised my hand. I was working for Marlon Fitzwater, who was the press secretary at the time. And he, frankly, a trip to Cincinnati to campaign for a state Senate race didn't actually get him, help him leap out of bed every morning. But for me, I was like, I'll go. I volunteered for every single trip. And that's how, I ended up in this photo and in a bunch of other ones. It was, you never, again, as informal or as close and intimate as this picture might look, there was never a sense that you weren't living some magical life. It was the most dignified, and he was the most dignified man you could possibly work around.
The training must have been just amazing. But you always hear stories about that exactly. I remember, Trish, my sister Trish, as you well know, and she worked in one of the ad teams I'm not sure whether it was 88 or 92. And she talked to me yesterday about being out at Kennebunkport with the crew at 4:30 in the morning to set up. They were doing a shoot outside the house, and she was leaning against the door, figuratively maybe, and President Bush opened the door. It's 5:30 or 5:15. He was out going to bring the dogs out. And he saw them all shivering in the cold. It was like, good Lord, come in, and made the entire crew coffee and breakfast. And, that's, you don't fake that stuff. But you saw it firsthand.
Well, it's just that's so great. That makes me smile. And Trish was so talented. She worked on those Reagan Morning in America ads, I know, and she did Bush convention video, I think, for 1988. Exactly. Yep. Right, exactly. But he was people say, everyone made, he made everyone feel like their best friend. I think it was so much more than that. I think he just made people feel that they could be themselves. And which brings out the best in people when you can do that. I think that was probably one of his best gifts, certainly as a leader for his staff. And he had a big family, and they were around a lot. So he felt like everyone was family. He said, the more the merrier always.
It's funny. I remember in in 88 working in the New York office, I think my job was to cut out newspaper articles, glue them with a glue stick. That was the innovation of the day, to send them to somebody in Washington. But I was sitting next to some man that was, there doing basically the same, or making maybe fundraising calls, kind of day in and day out. And I had no idea it was President Bush's brother. It was Jonathan Bush. And it seemed a very humble, but definitely family affair. And Billy was skateboarding around her. That was maybe a couple of years before on a race, but there was no conceit. It was just pure modesty and hard work. And that marks that family, certainly.
How have you felt about the coverage over the last few days and the press? I
was going to ask you that.
Oh, well, let me ask you first, because maybe you might be a little more objective than I'm going to be.
I'll try to be nice, because I do work with the press from in my day job, but it's not just the press, but the entire country. I mean, you saw it with Reagan, you saw it with Bush, and most recently, we're seeing it with Bush now. We saw it with McCain, a little while ago. They tortured these guys in office, and the political left tortured them in office. And they were brutal to Bush and to Reagan and to McCain once he became once he became the nominee. And they kicked him all over the place and gratuitously. And now, of course, they're all the most wonderful people in the world, which I think they are. But it's nice that they're doing it. I like it. It's good for the country. It makes us all feel good. And for those who aren't huge Trump fans, it's fun to do the contrast. But you kind of shut one eye when you watch it and say, I imagine having worked in the press office, you must feel that way times 50.
It's really tough. I never understood then, and obviously I was biased, but I never understood why they were so mean to him. I don't know if they resented it. It was so easy to paint this portrait of the patrician from Greenwich, the Yaley who's in Skull and Bones, who did his obligatory service in the Navy. So they completely missed him. And I don't know if it was just in comparison to Reagan, who obviously was larger than life, or they just never liked Bush. They thought he was kind of goofy and a little dopey. They never cut him any slack, no matter what he did. And yet he soldiered on all the time. He really didn't complain about it. I know it bothered him. It really hurt the family. And you've heard a lot of them talk about that over the last couple of days. But then now to see them talk about how history will treat him kindly, and look what and you and I should go through his litany of accomplishments. They're extensive and will have a lasting, enduring impact on the world. He never got any credit for it. They just didn't like him. And they thought that, when he was folksy, that it was corny, and they just mocked him. And I guess maybe you have some insight into it, but it's frosting me now. Like you said, I'm glad for the country that he's being celebrated the way he should be. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, you're absolutely right. And I saw a clip a couple of days ago of President of George 41, kind of admonishing the press, saying, "Don't mistake courtesy or politeness or manners for weakness." And that's such an important point. And I fell for it a little bit. I wasn't the biggest Bush fan, and cause I was kind of more Reagan Kemp. There was a little bit more of a graininess to them. But when you think about what George H.W. Bush did for the country, besides being shot out of the sky, rescued and then go right back into combat for another year or so, this guy had guts like, let's just go through the resume. CIA director. What kind of stuff he must have known or been involved with to be CIA director, and still had that sunny disposition. Don't worry, be happy. And he knew all of that kind of thing. UN ambassador, envoy to China. You pointed out before when we spoke, he was the RNC chairman during Watergate.
Yeah.
You got to be the metal. You have to have the metal. You have to have to stand up to those forces and to stay calm and cool and Bush-like is extraordinary.
Well, I was watching some old clips this weekend of interviews he did post-presidency that I had never seen before, when he talked about his failure to take credit for things at the time that maybe could have helped him win the election. Although, he says it was because of the "read my lips, no new taxes" pledge that he broke. But more importantly, that he just never stood up and said, "Here are the 10 things I've done today." And God knows we've seen, I don't know how many presidents and other elected officials since then take the exact opposite tack, which is take credit for things that they didn't do. And yet I'm not sure he could have been as successful as he was if he had done it any other way. I don't think it's any mistake that we succeeded because of his style. It's not in spite of his style. It was because of his style. And Reagan made a brilliant choice in bringing him on as vice president. Brilliant. Reagan never have been if Bush hadn't had the experience and the relationships and his diplomatic skills were unmatched.
And I think he gave the the Republican establishment, which was a little bit more centrist in those days, the comfort that he would be there to advise Reagan, who they were terrified of, and it definitely worked. No question.
I heard today, it was so interesting. This now everyone's saying, well, let's pause for a moment and look at this nonpartisan day. Not unlike what they said actually during McCain's funeral, that, we have Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell standing next to each other, paying glowing tributes to Bush, and this is what we need more of, and on and on. But, Bush worked with Democrats from day one. He in Congress, he was very close to the Democrats. In fact, he was very close to Lyndon Johnson. When Johnson was president and and Bush was a congressman, he actually had his entire staff. I don't know if you heard this story. It's a great one.
No.
Bush was at his district office. They were in Houston. Lyndon Johnson, it was 1964. Lyndon Johnson was coming through town in his motorcade. Bush had his entire staff go out and stand on the street and wave and applaud. And everyone said, why are you making us do this? He's a Democrat. And Bush said, he's the president of the United States. And
that's right.
Johnson was close. And when Johnson left office, apparently Bush was the only Republican congressman to go say goodbye and thank you to him.
Wow.
He worked with Democrats all the time. And
you know what?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like you talked before about how he wouldn't talk about his accomplishments. I was, reminded, I have a cousin that did speechwriting for him that wrote something over the weekend that he would constantly want to put war stuff into his speeches, and Bush would constantly take them out. And besides the humility of that, just in a practical, gross political matter, that's good politics. That works. People really get to respect you when you act like that. I think those qualities that people made fun of in George Bush are really attractive ones. And I think there's room for them to come back. I'm not sure they will, but even tactically, even if you were going to be, crass about it and just, play humble or act like you're humble, I think it's appreciated. I think the public really likes that. It takes time to get, but information does get out, but stay who you are and don't boast and don't take credit for things you didn't do. Certainly. There's a lot there. I think that's available to people.
And let other people tell your story.
Right.
Did you know all about in real time the work he had done to assure the reunification of Germany and why he had really downplayed not just his own role, but the United States sense of feelings of success around the end of the Cold War when the Berlin Wall came down, and why he did that and why it was so important that we give Gorbachev a chance to, keep things stable in Russia. I don't remember about it.
I didn't have a clue. And I was blown away when Merkel said that so directly. And just said this would not have happened without Bush. And that's a big statement to make. I mean, from a national leader. I had no idea, Liz, and you may have been, close to it, but I had not a clue.
I had no idea.
Yeah. I also remember one thing from the first Gulf War, and it was, it came, it was the opening, it was the day after the opening salvo. And when it went from Desert Shield to Desert Storm. And I remember it well because I hadn't paid my cable bill and a friend was coming over to watch the war break out. And the only channel that Manhattan Cable or whoever it was at the time allowed you to watch was CNN headline news, which was perfect. And but everybody was exultant because it was like, I think they said there was a quote, the Republican Guard is decimated, and there was very strong language. And if you remember, they were talking about, the smart bombs going down chimneys. It was when a lot of the modern weaponry was first showcased for the world, and it was impressive. And President Bush the next morning, kind of admonished the country and said, this is going to get hard. Like, don't be overly optimistic. And it turned out that the war went better, I think, than even he hoped it would go. But he's like, don't, temper your enthusiasm. There are people dying, there are people in the field, and this may not be so easy. It's a big army that Iraq has. And I remember thinking just how responsible that was, and how, others would want to gloat and fly the flag and and I'm not saying mission accomplished for a son, but that feeling where you want to beat your chest a little bit. And he had obviously been around war before, and he knew how the world really worked and understood Murphy's Law as it exists. And I thought it was a really great leadership moment. I wanted him to beat his chest as an American. I wanted to yodel, but he knew better, and I'd never forget that.
You know what? No, he's one of the things that's really been interesting to compare to now is his experience starting at age 18 as a fighter pilot, but also the CIA work he did and the UN work. His confidence and his sense of security that he had, knowing about the commitment and the talent and the fortitude of all the people in the various branches of the military, the armed services, and and the government throughout, the civilians and the military, was he knew it. So it obviously allowed him to be the kind of president that he was. He didn't need to do the chest thumping. He knew those guys basically had it covered. He knew that if he gave an order, it was going to be executed, and honor. And I think what the worst thing that's happened, or one of them in the last 2 years, and it even goes back, frankly, it happened a bit during the Obama administration as well, the tearing down or the questioning openly of our own service members has been so destructive to this country.
I don't think there's a question about it. And he's he never did that. And even with foreign leaders, I mean, writing in the last couple of days about he made a deal not to go into Baghdad, and the other leaders in the world, the other 29 nations that joined us in the first Gulf War, knew that he was a man of his word, and that was the deal, and he would honor it. And there were a lot of people screaming for him, finish the job, go in there and do it. But that was not the deal that he had arranged with the other powers, and he was a man of his word. Which is a rare thing. You mentioned about him 18. Did you ever read the book Fly Boys, Liz?
No, and you know what? I'm sure I should, because I've seen it, but I have not read it. Was it great?
Definitely read it, because your father was a pilot in the war, and just for that alone. But it was so good, and it's a very easy read, and I recommend Fly Boys to anybody out there. But and I'm going to give a little bit of it away, and I apologize for doing that. But it focuses on an island in the Pacific that the Japanese are holding, and they have American prisoners. And over time, they're starving to death, and they begin to eat the Americans, the prisoners, which didn't come out until that book, or maybe shortly before. That's the things that never get told from wars. But they were eating the prisoners. And when Bush was shot down, he was washing ashore to the beach, and the Japanese were going to pull him in. And the tide changed, and he went back out and got picked up, and goes on to become president of the United States and have a son who's president of the United States, and a son who's governor of Florida, and and vice president of the United States under Reagan, and what he did with after the Cold War that you're describing. All the things that he did is just those little twists of fate. But it's in Fly Boys. It's an absolutely amazing read, and if anyone who wants to get the sense of the stakes in those. Everyone knows what the stakes were, but it's a great story. It's a very interesting story.
Well, there's all this talk, and there's psychologists, speculating about why he enlisted at 18 and why he committed the rest of his life to public service. And was it, again, the noblesse oblige or the guilt but in fact, George W. Bush said, first of all, he had just such a tremendous sense of adventure that he would enlist, and then after, when he came back and when he finished college, went right out to Odessa, Texas. He could have gone an entirely different track and ended up in New York and done the classic, post-Yale Wall Street. His family was very involved here in New York, but he didn't. But W said that his father basically every single day said that the fact that his two they weren't co-pilots, and the two guys on the plane with him when he was shot down did not survive.
Right.
He said there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't think about them. And I think his sense of gratitude for life every single day really is what drove him and informed so much of what he did. And it really was extraordinary. And he also said that he was so terrified of being captured that day. He was in the life raft for 4 or 5 hours because he knew exactly what would happen to them. to him. Look what happened to John McCain.
Yeah, and there was worse,
Yeah.
which is hard to imagine. You've talked about that before, that gratitude that generation came back with, and your father being of that generation, my father being of that generation, both veterans of the war, and it really set them apart. But I'm not willing to concede that the kind of values that George Bush demonstrated as vice president and president in all of his roles, I'm not willing to concede that those values are gone. I just don't give up on that notion. Those are things that we can relearn and re-honor and re-cherish. Now people scoff at white privilege, but in those days, people who happened to be white and happened to be privileged, realized it came with an obligation, not because they were white, but because they were privileged, because they had more than other people did, and they would dedicate their lives to serving them in an honorable way and not to enrich themselves. I don't give up on that coming back one day. I may be foolish, but that's where I want to. That's where I'd like to be.
Well, listen. First of all, look at the service and commitment we still have from so many young men and women who fight for this country, and
absolutely,
both literally in the armed forces or just on the front lines of doing Meals on Wheels every day in their local community. So I agree with you. I'm not cynical at all. I think. There's certainly, we don't have the gentility and the civility and the respect at the national level. Certainly we don't on television, across the board. There are a lot of guilty parties here, but the rank and file that you and I always talk about at the local level, who are just living life every day, being kind to their neighbors and making, life a little bit better for their community. That's alive and well. We need more of it all the time, but I'm with you on that. We can't throw all of that out just because there's a lot of noise on cable news.
And that's also not going to change with immigration. I mean, if you have people coming from all over the world to come in, and there's people panic about the demographic shift in the country, but there is something to Americanism, and it flies above any one ethnicity, race, or religion. It's the I don't know if you're not allowed to say melting pot anymore, but the melting pot, and as long as you are cleaning up for your neighbor and you're getting to understand civics and the responsibilities of citizenship and the rest of it, there's no reason that America doesn't go on. It may look, in the same way it always has. It looks a little bit different over time. I mean, there was a time where there weren't very many Irish people here. And some people probably really enjoyed that, but it's that's still out there. I agree with you, Liz. I think that's out there in a big way. And besides, we can always take solace in knowing that we're not France. You look at those riots there. I mean, I know they go through this in the Paris riots and all across the country, but we're not there, at least, which is nice to see.
Well, and this is largely over $6 a gallon for petrol. Is that
right?
And just the general state of the economy. That's terrifying that this is what the response to that is. I saw pictures of Macron today. He looked very unnerved.
It seems to be in the French culture is that, it's time for demonstrations. It's been a while and people hit the streets, and I'm not trying to make fun. And I've, read stories about the financial hardship that a lot of the yellow vests, I guess they're calling them, have. And you've got to be concerned about that. And I especially appreciate that they're revolting against high taxes, with France being one of the highest tax, states in the nation, in the world. But still, it's like, really, that's what you want to do? I kind of prefer the British grin and bear it, and the Americans seem to be somewhere in between. But at least we don't have that kind of unrest here, and hopefully we will continue to avoid it. We have our times, but not like that. Those pictures are scary coming out of there.
They are scary. How are you feeling? Let's move past this week and George Bush's funeral services and get to what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks and months. So I saw that the House just postponed. What is there, an armistice agreement over the budget shutdown? We've got a two-week truce.
I think a 2-week truce. That's right.
Have you been following the tweets of our local congresswoman from Brooklyn?
Ocasio-Cortez, AOC as they call her now. No, but I see her face pops up all the time. I can't remember what she's talking about now. She wants to be on the finance committee. And
the Green
what else does she want?
Green New Deal, the climate. She's been very focused for last week on climate change.
That's right. She wanted to get rid of carbon by 2020. So
I'm just wondering more about her approach. If you think that coming in like this is constructive, you think it's going to help her? Do you think it even matters? It's just noise. I don't know that there's been an incoming Congressperson.
I think yes, if you can sustain it. And I've been involved in some campaigns, and one with you. Where there was in 2006 there was a Senate race, if you remember, in New York, a U.S. Senate race, where you can come out like gangbusters and get a lot of public attention, but if you don't have substance underneath it somewhere, it's going to collapse. And it's she's certainly figured out how to get publicity, and she's figured out how to be cutting edge. She's the it kid in Congress, and we just have to wait and see how she plays her cards. But if there's, at the end of the day, if there's nothing real beneath it, and if she doesn't have good staff work, she doesn't bring in like really bright staff people, not just ideologues, then she'll crumble like others that have come before. But we'll have to see. I mean, she's done a good job getting known. I think that's a good point. I also think, as probably everyone in the country does, the next few weeks is going to be the Mueller show. And it doesn't really matter what I think or you think or anyone else thinks. It matters what you think, but what other people think. But there's no use in even talking about it. Almost, we just have to wait and see what's going to come out. Like, does he have the goods on Russia? And I think he might. I think Mueller might. And I'm proven wrong in the next few weeks. But that's going to really roil this country. It's going to be bad. I think immediately post the Bush funeral, and there'll be a few more days of news there. It's going to go right back to that. And Drudge is reporting, or I guess Yahoo News is reporting that Mueller, he has people in his staff, saying that it's wrapping up. It's coming to a head, and God knows what happens. I mean, I think it comes down to did the Russians have undue leverage over Trump? Is he compromised in some way, either for business deals or other things? And if he was, did he do things favorable to Russia as a result? And if that's the case, we've got a real problem. We'll see.
Do you think he's going to have a lot of defenders? Now, put aside the Roger Stones and Michael Cohen's in this latest episode. What about members of Congress right now? How do you think the stuff people shake out?
I think he'll have as many defenders as he needs until they're all gone suddenly. And if it's obstruction, I think he survives it. If it's, I tend to think that there's obstruction going on every day by Twitter. I really do. And apparently a lot of lawyers agree when you're praising, Roger Stone for not being a rat and being, he's got guts and the rest of it. You're just kind of sending messages to somebody who's in the middle of this investigation. He's doing it with Cohen. He's doing it, talking about, if there really were talks about potentially pardoning Cohen, some months ago, that kind of stuff is really hairy. And so I think the Republicans that are out there they're pretty much in the Trump party right now. The remaining Republicans are the Trump party, and they'll stay loyal. But when it breaks, they'll jump like rats off a ship because they've shown their colors. They're going to go where the wind blows. And there are some that are truly loyal Trump people and, that were out there early for him. But the rest of them that just got on the train because it was moving in one direction, they'll jump off just as soon as it breaks, in my opinion. But it's got to be more than obstruction, though. It's got to be something. It's got to be something of substance. I don't think he'll get impeached. I don't see that happening. It would have to be something huge. I mean, he'll still go the 2 years, but the question is, what does the country go through during those 2 years, or at least for part of them? I think it's going to be bad. Do you have a sense on your end?
No,
a guess?
We've talked about this offline. I think it's going to be bad. I agree with you. There are some people who will never abandon him. By people, I'm talking about sitting members of Congress. But I don't know, these candidates who are up for in 2020, Republicans, particularly in the Senate, are going to have a decision to make because they're not going to be able to dodge this one. That's for sure. I don't know who else is going to be part of this, what else will surprise us coming out of the Mueller stuff? I mean, nothing's going to surprise me around Roger Stone. Nothing would surprise me around the Trump sons. But you're absolutely right. There's a big difference between obstruction, collusion, treason.
Yeah.
Trying to keep the relationship going so we could build the tower in Moscow, which that's going to, if that's the whole thing, that could be a little muddled. I'm not sure that could get him either. But
the thing is that the narrative that's been laid out over time, and some of us were onto it earlier, but the facts weren't there to support it. The narrative is pretty clear and pretty clean as I see it. It's the narrative of trying to maintain that relationship with the Russians, certainly for business at a minimum, and then the Russians finding a way to take advantage of that and then go all in and help them in the campaign. That gets really dicey. And if, when you talk about Roger Stone giving, having intermediaries to get to Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, I mean, if that comes out in the indictment with dates, times, photos, timestamps, signatures, that's going to be tough to overcome.
Yes, it is.
And there's nothing that Mueller can't get. I mean, there's nothing he can't get. And the other thing I wonder is, what's Putin going to do? Like, say, maybe this is all wrong, but I think it's moving in that direction where there's a little fire there under that smoke. But what does Putin do? Does he throw Trump under the bus? Does he then leak out to the world? Does he try and damage Trump, not because he hates Trump, but just to disrupt the American political process more? Like, does he figure that the thing is coming down? I mean, ultimately, the Russians don't care about Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton and the rest of it. They just want to damage the American reputation and break it and separate it from NATO and the rest of the West. Do the Russians then go into that mode of destroying Trump's credibility with leaked memos or whatever they've got, if they have them? I wouldn't be surprised if that began to occur. It was interesting that the Russian media went crazy at the president a couple of days ago after he canceled the formal meeting at the summit, and nothing happens without Putin's permission, obviously, in that country. And it was several different media outlets just went hell bent after President Trump. I mean, nasty, vicious, like really, really strong language, and that would not have come out without permission. And I don't know whether they were trying to run a smokescreen and look all tough for some reason, or whether it was a harbinger of things to come. But there's stuff in the air, and I don't know. Ukraine is out there; they've got tanks near the border. Call me crazy, but it feels a little unsettled right now.
What do you make of the latest, the reports out of the G20 of the president's dinner with Xi and the tariffs, and why we're still trying to figure out if it's really true? Not just true, but what is the agreement for real?
If it actually happens, yeah. I think my gut, and it's just my gut, and you may disagree or agree, but I think anything to do with China and tariffs is probably fine with most of the American people. I think there's a general sense or understanding that China has not been fair for a long, long time. When you get into Europe or Canada or even Mexico, I think much, much less so. And we really are a free trading country, and that's enriched us more than anything else that we've done economically. But with China, I think whatever it is, I think he's in somewhat safe grounds, and we'll see whether that deal is made to knock off the tariffs. But other than farmers, I don't think we're really feeling it that much yet. And the Chinese seem to be a little bit. So we'll see. But, I don't think it's devastating at all.
I didn't see how the markets reacted to it today. Did you?
Yeah, the markets took off. Yeah, they surged. I'm just looking at a photo now. I pulled up the Drudge site of President Trump and the First Lady saluting President Bush's casket, and it's a nice shot. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's good to see.
Yeah.
The funeral. Yeah, they were not the best of friends, obviously, but that's the way it's supposed to turn out. But back to Bush, Liz. What was it like to be around him? I know you couldn't sit in the Oval Office or in the vice president's office every day and shoot the breeze. But was he easy to interact with? Was he a good manager? Like, what was that?
Easy to interact with. It's funny that you'd ask that about manager. Obviously, I reported to Marlon Fitzwater, so it wasn't like I was running and asking the vice president for permission for things.
Wait, another Diet Coke?
Things he was. Listen, I can't remember if we talked about this when we were talking about Barbara Bush not long ago. They were so generous and gracious to me. We took a fair amount of trips to the New York area where my family lived, and I'm telling you, I don't know how my parents knew what the schedule would be, but every time I was going to be within 50 miles, my mother would round up her 3 Irish sisters and she'd say, we'd like to join you at the such and such event. And I can tell you there were many, many times when my mother would come with her sisters to get her picture taken with the Bushes. We would be at an event at the Ryetown Hilton, or we'd be at an event out in Long Island, or wherever. And they would come, and the Bush, and I would have to say in advance, first to Marlon, would you mind if my parents, just got a little photo? It wasn't even my dad, it was just my mom. My dad came to the White House Christmas party, which was terrific, and he really loved it. But my mother's sisters would find any excuse just to be in the green room, the back room. And that really happened a number of times. Every time afterwards, the vice president would say, on the plane on the way home, like in a picture like this, so nice to see your mom. So nice. And then, or in advance, oh yeah, I hear your mom's going to be coming. I mean, he really did that stuff.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
One Christmas, I wrote him a thank you note, him and Mrs. Bush, for being so, to tell him what a privilege it was to work for him, and to thank him for always being so kind to my family. And he wrote me back, thanking me for the thank you note, how much my note meant to him and Barbara. And I still have it. And it's true that he did that. His whole life was about that kind of communication, little things that were huge. They really something. So he was wonderful that way. Even he was no pushover with everybody when it came to, wanting things. Listen, everybody wanted to perform for him because of who he was. I heard Dick Cheney yesterday, actually. I don't know if you saw him this weekend being interviewed. I think he was on with Chuck Todd. And he said that he, at one point, he had to fire someone. And it was when he was Secretary of Defense under Bush 41. And he said it was a pretty serious thing, but I didn't want to do it by myself. So I called Camp David where Bush was, and he was actually playing tennis. And he said, I got him off the tennis court. And I said, I guess got to tell you, sir, I've got to fire so-and-so. And he said, President, at that point he was president, never asked him any questions, said, whatever you do, I've got your back. Do what you got to do. That's how he managed. His folks knew he had their back. So for Powell and Dick Cheney and all those folks, that's, unfortunately, you just don't see a lot of that right now.
Oh, you definitely don't see that. That's for sure.
You see a tweet.
Yeah. And I wonder, right, how much of it is the availability of those things. But I think it's the Bush upbringing, certainly in the tradition back then. But that's really, really that's good stuff. Did I ever tell you that I only met President Bush once, and I met Barbara a couple of times. It was so exactly. She was just what you'd think. It was don't get up. You know what I mean? She'd be walking by a table, and if you don't get up for the First Lady or the Queen of England, you're pretty much at a ham.
Right.
Don't get up. That's actually what she said. Don't get up. And but I went and one of your friends, and I won't name her, was on the White House advance staff, and insisted on getting me into a VIP line at a New York City fundraiser in 1991. It was just after or before the Gulf War. I think it was right afterwards. So Bush was a gigantic figure. I mean, presidents are huge figures, but having just won that war and so completely, it was a big deal. And I was like, no, that's okay. And she's like, no, I got to do this for you. So she filled out the card I guess you have to fill out for the photographer, and stuck me on the line. And everyone on the line had paid, $10,000 minimum to get in the VIP room. And so I'm like doing the Luca Brasi online, like rehearsing the Mr. President, it's an honor on your daughter's wedding, to try and get the right words down. And so I step into they have as you probably set up a lot of them, but they would have the little curtained area. So you go inside the curtain, and there were. Was my mother? Your mother was your aunts were in there. Exactly. Your sisters. Everybody who's having a cocktail. No, but I walked in. I greeted Mrs. Bush first because I thought that might be proper etiquette. I thought it might be nice, And then I greeted him, and I said whatever I had rehearsed, and shook hands. And I kept thinking like firm handshake, look in the eye, eye to eye, all that kind of stuff that you're weaned on. And then thank you so much. And I walked out and I was thinking, boy, I did really well. And I got halfway across the ballroom and I felt a hand on my shoulder. And I turned around and it's President Bush. He had to run after me. And he said, Bill, we didn't get the photo. So I have a column coming out in Newsday about it tomorrow. And it's in there among other thoughts about Bush. And and I'm just kind of laughing in the picture, feeling like a total idiot. But they were so nice about it. They must have thought, how does this dope get $10,000 to be in this room? but very comfortable. Very comfortable people. Yeah. And it was that was my one experience. You've obviously had many, many.
Well, it's funny. She was as we know, she wasn't a softie.
No.
But she was very real. And she came on the plane one morning. You can imagine the amount of food we ate traveling around. And it's like any campaign. How many pounds do you put on a campaign? 20 pounds at least per campaign. Well, this was like a year-long campaign. We were on this plane.
I had 20 a year. Yeah.
4 flights a day. And get on the morning, and there were bowls of candy in the middle of the tables where we sat. And then we would pork chops for lunch kind of stuff. And she came on one morning, and I have a picture of this. Marlon and Fitzwater and I were sitting at one of those 4-seater tables, and in front of an entire bowl of Three Musketeers and a few other things. And she took one look at us, and she said, "That's it. We're not having any of this on here anymore." And that was the end of the candy on the plane.
The candy?
Took the food away. I mean, we had Marlon used to call them belly bombs. They were Danish, filled with an injection of fruit or custard or whatever the heck is. Before the eggs, before we actually had a breakfast, we would have those, and it was just really, and she just couldn't stand it. I mean, we were like two sloths, and it wasn't just the two of us. There were plenty of other folks lined up right behind us. But she
it was like gluttony is a moral failing. Totally, I get it.
She actually, I saw her tell advance men that they needed to shave before the vice president got on the plane.
Wow.
Stubble in the morning. Yeah, and it was just very, it was, you're going to go take care of that. And that was what she did. But hey.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, exactly.
And I know. And frankly, everyone in a way really appreciated it because nobody wanted to disappoint either one of them. Nobody.
How many people would have been on one of those flights? Like you're talking about, you would serve food in them. I've never been on one. It must be a pretty cool experience.
Oh gosh, it was tremendous. Well, the Secret Service, and then there were usually maybe 6 or 8, maybe 10 reporters, depending upon where we were going and what was going on at the time, and then probably 15 staff. So I'd say 40 on the manifest. Yeah,
so you had plenty of room, and then I guess the president or vice president has the office suite, their own little spot. Obviously, is it mostly off the record with the reporters on those flights, or just general rules as needed?
Yeah, the general rules exactly. And it wasn't like every flight the vice president invited them all up to sit in the cabin and talk. It would depend what was going on, for sure.
Right, but they'd come out to the event that you were going to. Right, got it. Yep.
Yes. And I have to say, really, and my job really was to make sure that nobody took a picture of him while he was eating, that kind of thing. I was just really the press shepherd. I wasn't writing policy for sure. But really, by and large, there was a tremendous amount of respect for how things should work and did work. And Marlon, extraordinary.
If anyone's ever seen the Hillary Clinton hot dog photo, you know how important that is. That's
right. It's exactly right.
And everywhere you go on campaign, someone wants you to try the local specialty. You haven't had the Speedy, or you haven't had the,
Right.
And if you don't eat it, it's a scandal. You have to come back to the city to eat it.
Yeah. But I think, like I said, I don't think the press treated him well when it came to a lot of the coverage, but they were certainly very respectful and they liked him. But
you think so? There didn't seem to be a mean bone in his body. Although I'm sure he was tough as nails. I mean, like to be a CIA director, I can't even imagine what the gut checks you've got to do in that job, or as president, or in any number of jobs he had. And also, on the UN side, I mean, He was a guy who was able to face down foreign leaders, tough ones, tyrants, and win them over and bend them to his will without, knocking them over the head. That's a talent.
Well, and you look really now and just see what he was able to accomplish while staying so close and connected to not only his family, his kids who adore him. I mean, look at this. I mean, extended families, grandchildren, brothers, sisters, his own. It was all real. I mean, those relationships were nurtured every single day, whether he was traveling all over the globe or he was, at Kennebunkport or in Houston at his house. I mean, that's what kind of a person can actually do that. I mean, really. Trish
talked about that, about when I said that when they went up into the house in Maine in Kennebunk, and he was cooking for the grandchildren, and you could just see how much they loved him. I mean, he was for real, just shiny eyes and, a real American family.
The devotion. Yeah. Both going in both directions. People talk about being grounded. I mean, there's one grounded man. Holy cow.
So we're probably going to run out of time shortly. Is there any final thoughts that we have on this? I don't know. We can always go on next week if not.
Well, I'm so glad that you said what you said, which is that it's not all is not lost. We've got to remember this, and there are good people everywhere, and we do need leaders like this. It's a different time for sure, but we can't blame it all on cable news and and partisanship. There are too many good examples out there for us to follow, for us to let it all dwindle.
Yeah, I was watching the guard taking the president's body up the steps to be shown, and you would hear the clip of step, boom, step, and my first sense was this terrible sense of nostalgia for what we've lost in this country, and what I decided to do instead was think what we still have, and we still have that, and that does still exist, and we just have to nurture it, in my opinion. And I could be so fatalistic, as you know, I'm like, it's the end of the world. Politics has collapsed. But, there is no end of the world until there's the end of the world. Profound way to go out.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
But now, wait a minute. I'm talking about America.